Today, in the driver's seat, we have the member for Warringah, Zali Steggall. How you doing, Zali?
I'm very good, thank you.
That's
very
good.
Excited. This is cool.
Thanks very much for coming for a drive today. I've been really looking forward to having a chat with you. We've got a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about climate change. We're going to talk about integrity in Australian politics. Mm-hmm. And we're also going to talk about this incredible independence movement that's happening across Australia, which to a large part, people like yourself have really inspired. And your incredible community group that had such success in the last election. So yeah, I'm really keen to talk about that. And I'm also keen to talk about this incredible...
And we're going to talk about the car.
Absolutely.
And off we go.
I never miss an opportunity at the traffic lights to do a 0 to 60.
A quick acceleration.
A quick acceleration, just to show people around me how dominant electric vehicles are.
So it's interesting though, as soon as you take your foot off the accelerator, it does decelerate really fast.
Yeah. So you can basically drive this car with one pedal. There's still got very good brakes as well if you need to brake faster. But what that means is that you're not actually using your brake pads.
Yeah.
And there's a guy that's done like 400,000 kilometers in a Tesla with the same brake pads.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So electric vehicles are a lot more reliable, a lot more durable than internal combustion as well.
And obviously a lot more economical too.
Yeah.
You know, the maintenance is a lot less. And which is really relevant right now with the price of petrol. Very cheap to run.
Yeah, I just had a chat with a friend of mine. Yeah, there you go.
Is that electric?
This is manual, yeah. You can use the hand for that.
I can use the hand to make sure I'm checking the car that's coming behind me.
I was chatting with a mate of mine from Central Queensland last night about petrol prices, and he said, you know, he went in to fill up his car yesterday, and he had to question the lady behind the counter, like whether the price was right, because he just couldn't believe how much he was paying.
I mean, it's going to get to $2.50 easy. It's ridiculous. Which is what I'm loving about having an EV. I just haven't been into a petrol station in ages.
Yeah.
It's quite amazing. Just you just don't go there. And it's so easy to just charge it up at home, especially when you're just commuting around the city and doing small trips. There just is there's no concern. But then it's interesting, people still raise range anxiety. And now you've travelled all around the coast, right? You've gone up to Queensland, down to Victoria, South Australia. There is no concern. There is quite a good infrastructure around charging. It doesn't mean we don't need to keep focusing on it, though. I do think the government needs to invest into better charging infrastructure to deal with that. There is a responsibility there that needs to happen.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, from my experience, I've never, like to date, I haven't had to wait for a charger. Mm-hmm. But there are going to be a lot more electric vehicles coming, so the infrastructure will need to grow with it. Yeah. When I drove from Mackay down to Canberra in I think July last year, I stopped at Goulburn at the Tesla charging station there, and a little birdie told me that Angus Taylor's office was only 300 meters from the Tesla charging station there. And like a week before I was there, Angus Taylor had said that he would never drive an electric vehicle because of the long distances he had to drive. And so I shot a little video of me driving from the charging station 300 meters past his office and basically saying that I'd just driven 2,000 kilometers in the last 2 days and had without any problems whatsoever. So
yes, I've raised electric vehicles with Angus Taylor, and I've raised the question of obviously what incentives the government's going to put in place, and really needs to lead by example. And I had a very disappointing response. There's an expectation that the private sector is going to transition its fleets to electric vehicles, but when I put to him that really there's a responsibility on the federal government to lead the way, ensure the federal fleet be electric, I got just a rubbish response about range anxiety and inconvenience of travelling great distances, and it just showed the absolute unwillingness to embrace the opportunity and the transition, is very, very disingenuous.
Yeah.
Is how I would put his commitment to reducing emissions.
So do you think that the reason for this, because you and I and a lot of Australians now know that this range anxiety and a lot of the negative stuff about EVs, we know that it's BS, right? So where is this coming from? Is it ignorance, or is it something to do with, we know that Santos sponsored the Australian government's stand at COP26.
Yeah.
Santos is one of Australia's largest oil and gas companies, and electric vehicles are a direct threat to oil industry profits, right?
Yeah.
So where is this coming from, this negativity around EVs?
Well, especially when you think about, from oil refinery, we import most of our oil. We pay a fortune for. We had 4 refineries. We went down to, I think it's 2, 1 really only operational. It is costing us billions of dollars. We don't have a domestic car manufacturing industry. There is no reason to be protecting ICE vehicles. There's just none. But yeah, there is a complete reluctance to progress that from the government.
Yeah.
And look, I think it's vested interest, it's influence of lobby groups, but even within the car industry, there is a frustration at the government or the coalition's unwillingness to progress to cleaner car emission standards, better fuel quality standards, and progressing transition to EVs. So it's kind of, around the transport, it's hard. It's a little difficult to understand why that reluctance. I think it's if you acknowledge the opportunity of transitioning to electric vehicles, you then acknowledge, I guess, a transition to new technology.
Yeah, more
and
broadly.
That in some way acknowledges a global warming imperative, and then that makes it difficult to ignore it on the energy front. So I think it's all tied up in this ideology and this, we've had 2 decades of first denying global warming and what that's doing to our climate. And now we've seen a very, concerted effort to delay.
Yeah.
So delaying transition, putting up every excuse you can possibly think of to delay that transition.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the Morrison government's been
behind
doing.
it.
I have to say, never had an acceleration like this one.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, it doesn't get old either. I've had this car for 2 years now, and still
You love it every time.
Every time. And I think it's the great thing about EVs, and especially these kind of high performance EVs, is it's something to be excited about for the future. And I think we spoke about this a little bit before, but the transition to clean technology has traditionally been framed as a burden, as a negative.
Yeah.
Especially by, let's say, vested interests who don't want to see it happen.
Yeah.
It's been framed as something really negative, and that our quality of life is going to decrease. But the truth is, our quality of life is actually going to increase dramatically with this kind of technology.
Absolutely, and it's often criticised as an elitist aspect as well, that technology. But what happens and we see this with NASA, for example, right? Development of our space technology. When the high end develops the really cutting edge technologies, it translates down for everyone. It means cars will become safer, you'll have more features. It really does. It's a win-win. You are only going to benefit. Everyone is only going to benefit from the transition, because you're going to have safer, more reliable cars that run cheaper. It really does just revolutionise it. It's just those that oppose it are just generally old school, stuck in their ways, reluctant to embrace change. They believe, just lost touch.
Yeah, but I feel like that's really shifting now, and we are seeing this in the independence movement, that people are becoming a lot more engaged in politics. You saw it in your campaign against Tony Abbot, that your electorate really wanted to see action on climate change. you and I have followed this for a long time. I've followed it for 20 years, and it's been gut-wrenching to watch time after time Australia fail to take action on climate. But now I feel like is the time that the public are going to demand it, especially after these catastrophic floods that we've just seen in the last couple of weeks. The fires also happened since the last election, and people have had a gutful, and people want action now, and we want to step into the 21st century.
Yeah, look, I think it's been an interesting journey. I think you've had some players that have had incredibly detrimental impact on climate policy. In particular, Tony Abbot. He disregarded the long-term benefit for Australia and our communities because he prioritised his short-term political gain. He basically was interested in what's in it for me and can I score political points.
That's right. I got you covered.
Instead of what is actually ultimately going to be in the best interest of Australia. Look, at the end of the day, he fundamentally doesn't accept that global warming is occurring as a result of our impact as humans, and as such that we have any power to change what's happening. That is directly contradicted by the overwhelming consensus of world science across many, many fields. That's what's really important to remind people. It is indisputable that mankind is having an impact, is warming the planet through its activities, and it is via fossil fuels. So, we just have to address that. And I think for a lot of people, that awareness is now there. It's taken a long time. It has been very polarising, and I think the media has played a huge part in it, right? We know concentration of media ownership in Australia plays a huge part with that misinformation around climate, but also there's been, I think, a laziness from journalists in allowing spurious, debates around cost of transition and effectiveness, a need to transition, and everyone bears a certain responsibility for the fact that we have wasted a decade, and we are now playing catch up. But we do know. I'm a very forward-looking, facing person. I'm a glass half full kind of person. So I'm focused on what are the opportunities we have ahead of us. We know we're in a critical decade. We need to reduce emissions by 50 to 60% by 2030, and we have the technology to do it, right? This doesn't have to be so hard, but we do have to take off the handbrake and stop funding fossil fuels. Yeah,
absolutely. I want to explore a couple of other things to do with electric vehicles. One is pollution and the health implications. But before we get to that, I want to talk about fuel security and more broadly national security, and our reliance on imported petrol, diesel and oil more broadly. And it's really relevant at the moment because as we all know, there's some horrible things happening in Europe. We know there's a lot of tension in the world. We know that there's the potential for international conflict. Australia has over 20 million petrol and diesel cars on our roads and trucks. So all of our food, everything in our economy is transported using petrol and diesel, and 90% of that petrol and diesel is imported. So we're incredibly dependent on foreign energy, and that energy comes through just a couple of shipping lines, right? So it's actually at quite high risk. But the opportunity with electric vehicles is that if we run them off renewable energy, Aussie homegrown renewable energy, we can actually become energy independent in this country and minimise our risk.
Well, that's one of the things, just as the ex-fire chiefs gave very dire warnings to the government about impending risk around bushfires, right, pre-2019 season, and ultimately completely ignored by the government. Ex-retired defence chiefs have also put out a very important paper, I can't think of the name, but very important paper on our biggest national security risk is in fact climate change.
Admiral Chris Barry.
Yes. So I have had some briefings around that, and in terms of fuel security, huge aspect. But what was interesting was with the invasion by Russia of Ukraine, and obviously the fuel security issues, the conversation has been whether or not that means an expansion of gas to replace those supplies. But in fact, BlackRock, huge institutional investor, has prominently said, no, this will actually accelerate our transition to renewables, because renewables are the only fuel source where a plentiful supply is available via each country in its own sovereign kind of position. Especially a country like Australia, we are blessed with enormous potential when it comes to renewables in terms of our wind and solar, and really tidal as well. We don't do enough around hydro. So the number one way we can become completely fuel independent and secure is through renewables and clean energy. I mean, obviously there's a lot of focus on hydrogen. Very important to distinguish between blue hydrogen and green hydrogen. So the government, Scott Morrison and Angus Taylor, will talk about blue hydrogen, and that is dirty hydrogen essentially. That is hydrogen from gas, which to have any kind of low emissions position requires a huge amount of money spent on carbon capture and storage. So
which is a failed technology today.
So blue hydrogen is just another way of continuing to rely on fossil fuels. What we need to be focused on is green hydrogen. So that's hydrogen made from renewables. With clearly you have then a free input of energy, and that will allow green hydrogen to be the most price competitive, ultimately, fuel source. So there's no doubt about it that the conflicts in the world at the moment, especially with Ukraine, is a stark reminder of the need to transition to renewable energy.
Absolutely, and we look at the energy independence opportunities of Australia, but if we flip that and look at what gives autocrats like Putin so much power, it's their control over fossil fuels. Really, like one of the big parts of Putin's structure of power is the fact that he and a lot of the oligarchs around him control the oil and gas. So it's a highly concentrated form of energy, whereas renewables, because they can be generated anywhere by anyone, it's like a decentralized.
It's a lot more democratic. Renewable energy is a lot more democratic because it's free to all once you've invested in the infrastructure. Obviously, you need the grid and transmission, but yes, the supply is free. So it has incredible. It's a very big disruptor of traditional energy systems.
It's a decentralized version, and I'm going to try a segue here to independence, because independents are also like a decentralized.
There's a lot of segues you can do.
But it's a more democratic kind of version of power, and you could argue that with the independence movement is a more democratic version of political power.
Look, it's really interesting. I mean, I'm not I'm not a career politician. Have had other careers prior to entering politics, and there's this perception that politics is this dirty backstabbing game of why would you possibly why would you want to do that? But the reality is it doesn't have to be that way. It's the incumbents and the two-party kind of system. They have made people believe that it's this environment that you wouldn't want to be part of, because they want to keep you out of it, right? They don't want this to become more. Should we turn around?
We can turn around if you want. Keep going.
They don't want their environment to get more competitive. They don't want to have to deliver and actually be more proactive and actually listen to the communities. So they do everything they can to keep people out. They do not want you to participate in democracy. They want you to vote for them every 3 years and then get on with your life, and don't come and bother me too much in between. And that's got to stop, because that is just not. I keep forgetting which is.
Everyone does that.
They keep. That is not serving us well. What we're seeing is we're failing on key policy areas. We're failing to have long-term vision and long-term plans. I strongly believe major parties are so focused on the game of winning, right, every 3 years, that they forget about proper planning around the big issues. And unfortunately, the press has been complicit in that and has enabled it. So yeah, independents are disrupting. So I think this is the Kodak moment of Australian politics, where it is time for a bit more competition in Parliament and a bit more choice for communities. And it's easy for people to think that I'm only one person, how can I have the power to change it? But every vote counts. Every vote makes a difference, and every person in a community that talks to 10 people and they talk to another 10, and you build a tribe of people within a community that care about issues, that are interested in better representation, and that is how the independent movement works. It doesn't work. There's a lot of misconception about who's pulling the strings and who's controlling it. There are 3 key elements that are necessary, I believe, for a strong independent campaign and movement within a community. And your number one element, you need the tribe. You need people engaged in the community. You need people to care, people to wear the t-shirts, to go and volunteer and be out in the streets. The second aspect is you need a good organisation, right? I was a professional athlete. I don't believe in amateur hour. I believe in, if you're going to do it, you've got to do it well, and you've got to do it competitively. So I believe in having, a professional team structure. You have to get advice. You have to use consultants. You have to do what's necessary to take on the big party machine. And then thirdly, you need the right candidate. You need someone that is representative of the community, that the community backs, that wants to listen to the community. But also you need a candidate that is capable and has the character and the credentials, the career and the professional skills to do it. And what we're seeing is too often the major parties are not attracting very good talent. Because they know they will have to compromise. Major parties are not attracting very good talent. Too many people are entering into politics thinking it's a career pathway, that they'll go straight from university politics to being an advisor to being an MP. They have no life skills, no experience in business or other fields outside of that. And I think it's very poor culture kind of thing. Well, I think it's led to where we are now. 2021 was a watershed year for looking at the culture of Australian politics, the toxic masculinity, the level of... We're just going slow for a cyclist. There you go. The car has picked him up. The level of entitlement. There's a level of arrogance and entitlement in Australian politics that's horrifying, and needs to go, because it doesn't lead to good outcomes. Absolutely. I wanted to chat a little bit about that campaign leading up to the 2019 election, because I actually took Julia Zamiro for a drive last year. And shout out to Julia. There you go. And Julia has a little podcast series that she's been running for the last few months. And in her first episode, she interviewed the person who I think was running your camp, Mark Kelly. Yep, Mark Kelly, very passionate local in Warringah. He started the movement Vote Tony Out. That's right, yeah. So he was very frustrated, obviously, that as a member, Tony was not particularly interested in listening to the local community or representing the views of the community. And we saw that in particular around the same-sex marriage vote and the plebiscite. We had the third highest support vote in the country with 75%, and yet Tony did not reflect that in Parliament. So Mark... He told a couple of stories that I really loved, and I'd like to tell one now. So he said that when they kind of started, he'd printed up 5 T-shirts with Vote Tony Out,
and he arranged for a few people to wear them on a Sunday afternoon down at Manly, was it?
Yep.
And he was worried that the people wearing them might get like abused or harassed on the beach, and so when they came back after wearing these t-shirts, and they said, yeah, we had people coming up to us, and he thought, oh, they were getting abused or whatever, but they said, no, we had all these people coming up to us asking us where we could buy those t-shirts.
Yes.
So there seemed to be already the mood out there, and then it just grew from there.
Yeah, Warringah had about 3 or 4 different groups. So you had a young group of guys had started Think Twice Warringah. There was Vote Tony Out. There was Voices for Warringah. There were quite a few different groups. But so Vote Tony Out, Mark Kelly's group is how I came to it. A very good friend of mine, that my running partner, was a neighbour, and I saw on her social media feed the photo of Lane Beachley wearing a Vote Tony Out t-shirt, and I thought, oh, that looks like a really good Christmas present.
Yeah.
So I bought a few t-shirts for my parents and myself and my husband for Christmas. And the whole idea was that you buy the t-shirt, Mark would deliver them in person so that he has a chat with people about understanding why you're buying it, what are the issues that you're unhappy about, and then do a social media post and explain why. And so I did that, and at the same time I had read an article with Anthony Green talking about, what would it take for Warringah to change and to have an independent, and they had been looking for people to run, and I had read, I read the kind of things that they thought would be necessary, and I thought, there's no point on being unhappy with the status quo and just sitting on the sidelines. You can't be a passenger. You can't whinge in silence. You've got to step up and participate.
Yep.
So I reached out and said, look, I would be pretty interested in getting involved and running. And within about 5 days, the campaign was born.
Wow.
We were up and running. It was done, and so it's really, it's why for a lot of communities that contact us saying, oh, we wish we had an independent, don't wait for the candidate to get moving, right? It's really important for those communities to get active, get talking, get meeting, talk to your neighbours, get visible, because the more visible you are, the more you will attract more like-minded people in your community, and then people will know that support is there, the option is there, and the right candidates will come.
Yeah, I sat at breakfast this morning, I sat next to a gentleman in a pink t-shirt, and it was a bit of a conversation starter.
Yeah. Alrighty. I'll do that.
Oh, you want to drop the window and...
Sorry. We came in the other side already. It's for today.
Yeah, all good.
Thanks. I actually had breakfast at a cafe this morning and sat next to a gentleman in a pink Kylie Tink t-shirt, and it was a conversation starter.
Yeah.
I've also heard that her campaign has something like 700 volunteers now, and a lot of this also comes from the incredible Voices of Indi movement as well, which just started, as you say, started as a community group first, and then the candidate kind of emerged from that group.
Yeah. Well, it's communities. I don't know. Maybe traditionally you didn't talk about politics or religion, right?
Yeah.
But we need to talk about them, because the only way you change things or fix things is by talking about them. Pushing it under the rug doesn't help. And so for people to start to feel comfortable about talking about politics, it's not this dirty little secret. It's actually something you talk about it because it impacts your life.
Yep.
And you saw that in Indi in 2013, where the community got behind Cathy McGowan and did a really big change. Now, I think regional seats are quite different to urban seats. I think there are different maybe obstacles, it can be a bit different, but the same principles apply. You ultimately need your community with you, and so you need those volunteers, you need that tribe. I think I've got about 1,200 volunteers so far.
Wow.
And it's huge because it's local people saying this is what we stand for locally, right? The major parties tend to have to bus in volunteers, or they actually engage students to come and campaign for them from outside the electorate, and that's people that don't know what they're talking about, they don't understand the area, they have no real affinity with what matters. So yeah, that local element of the independent campaigns is incredibly important, and all the critics that are trying to point fingers at, who's pulling the strings and Climate 200 and all of these things, and the similarities between independents, they're ignoring the biggest thing that's staring them in the face, which is this is a reflection of communities. It's a reflection of what people are concerned about.
Yeah, and I guess it also gives people a real sense of purpose as well, because you're let's talk about like tribe, right? I read this amazing book called Tribe by a guy named Sebastian Junger, and he was a war correspondent in Afghanistan, and kind of started to look into what is this force that bonds groups together. And he looked at a whole range of things like Native American tribes and how that everyone in the tribe had a sense of purpose and meaning. And he also said, like, during the Blitzkrieg in London, even though it was a terrible thing, people reminisced about it because everybody pulled together and worked together. And I think for so many years now, people in Australia have felt disengaged from politics, like their voice doesn't really matter at all. But now all of a sudden with these community groups, they can join them, they can get involved, and that by volunteering, they're getting that sense of purpose again that we haven't had for so long.
Well, it's interesting to see what's happening to our social fabric. I think, religion doesn't have the same pull on communities that it did in previously. And so what are the things that unite us, how we, as a community? And what we're seeing through some of our natural disasters is communities coming together, right? Solidarity is amazing, and you see that real courage and support within communities. And modern world has isolated people. I think people feel disconnected and want to belong. They want to know that there is solidarity, that there is support. And what we find with a lot of our volunteers is people have made lifelong friendships. People, this is a larger family. People are part of something that is positive, that is purposeful, and that gives a lot of satisfaction and joy to people. So what I've found amazing has been, in the last 3 years as an independent MP, just how much sense of pride people share with me at what we now represent. And it makes it so, good for me in that, sure, there's the negativity sometimes of Parliament, and there's the nastiness sometimes in the media, there are there are aspects about politics that are not always rosy, but the support from the community and the positivity I get from them charges my batteries up real fast. And you're constantly reminded of the why. Why are you doing this? And so it's easy to do.
And I guess it's also like the David versus Goliath, but winning the David versus Goliath battle must have really been inspiring for the group in Warringah as well.
And look, there's definitely a sense of satisfaction of taking on the big party machine. And look, Tony is a wily politician. He's a very experienced politician. So obviously it took a very concerted effort. So I keep going over the middle bars.
That's all right.
Your sound. It did take a concerted effort to do it. But look, I believe in discipline. I believe in having a purpose and a plan in what you do, and being organised. And I've never been daunted by big challenges. So, I was probably about 13 when I decided I wanted to go to the Winter Olympics for Australia.
Wow.
That was not your most obvious choice at the time, but I wasn't at all daunted or held back by all the reasons why I couldn't or why it might be hard. All I focused on was all the ways in which I could.
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing with my career at the bar or then getting into politics. I never focused on the downsides or or the naysayers. I only focused on what I felt was necessary to make it happen, and then focus on that. So
would you say it's like almost a fearlessness? Not even because I like the idea of fearlessness where you're not even focused on what could go wrong or whatever. You're just focused on winning, basically, or
well, it's not winning's probably not the right way. It just focus. I'm a big believer in at the end of your life, you will never. I don't want to have any regrets.
Yeah.
I don't want to leave anything on the table. Right. I want to make sure I've played all my cards and I've done everything I could, and anything I set my heart on, I've given it a go.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to win. You're not going to succeed at everything. That's naive to think that. But if you give it 110%, if you give it your full focus, full attention, you give it everything, then it doesn't matter what the outcome is. You'll be satisfied with the effort you put in. And that was always how I approached my sporting career. It's how I approached sport. It's how I've approached law. It's how I've approached parenting and family and personal challenges, and very much approaching that on my career now as a politician. And so if we talk policy, for me, post the 2019 election, so important to put forward climate leadership and a good plan. So we did the work and put forward the climate change bill, which brought together, like never before in Australian politics, brought together every sector, whether it's business, industry, unions, environmental groups, civic society. We brought everyone together in support for this framework legislation that could map out our pathway to a safer future. And that's why I'm so determined that we to press on with the climate change bill and to legislate our commitment and long-term plan.
Do you want to tell us a bit more about that? Is it the 5?
So for this election, I've launched now the 5 steps to net zero. So I'd encourage everyone to check out my website for some information. Because we've got a lot of talk around net zero by 2050, right? And we've finally dragged the Morrison government to accept and commit to net zero by 2050, but really the Nationals are not truly committed, and the plan the government's put forward is only a plan for 85%. So really they're on a business as usual kind of approach. They're still delaying transition to renewables, and they're still funding fossil fuels. So we've got to call a spade a spade. It's a bit of BS what's going on from the government. And so for me, really important that if we're going to talk about net zero by 2050, what does it mean? What do you have to do to achieve net zero? A key component, we need to get to 50 to 60% emission reduction by 2030. To get to net zero sensibly, you need to do the work in this decade. So my 5 steps to net zero: step 1, pass the climate change bill, right? So that we have that legislative framework to map out our journey to net zero, to do it sensibly, fiscally responsibly, and make sure we take everyone along. Also make sure that we have national risk assessments, which is a key component of the bill, which obviously with bushfires to floods, we need national risk assessments and adaptation planning. Like it is criminally negligent that we are not properly equipped for what's coming and what's happening to our communities. Step 2, we need to electrify energy. The energy sector has the potential to be 80% renewable by 2030, and that will deliver our biggest emission reduction opportunity. I accept that the last 20% is difficult, but we need to at least be setting that target of 80% renewable by 2030 and invest into the transmission grid.
Like a smart grid almost.
A smart grid and transmission lines connecting up the right sectors. We also, the next sector is transport. So transport, we are dismally bad in our uptake of EVs. We're behind the rest of the world. We need to get to 75% new car sales being EV by 2030. And so that requires policy levers like getting rid of the luxury car tax on EVs, putting incentives to encourage corporate fleets to go electric so that you have a much stronger second-hand car market, EVs, and the federal government needs to invest into charging infrastructure to accelerate that comfort and get rid of any range anxiety.
What about vehicle emissions standards?
Yes. So at the moment we have some of the worst emission standards and also the worst fuel standards. So that means we are getting the worst cars. You know, we're going to be the dumping ground for the worst models. It also means we're not getting the best safety features. So it's not just a pollution and air quality issue, it's a safety issue. We're just not going to get the best vehicles. So it's just, and look, our fuel standards are not slated to be improved until 2027.
Wow.
And they're still, and by then they'll be even further behind. So it's ridiculous. Third step of the 5 steps is industry. It's a little harder, but we absolutely can we need to halve emissions in industry by 2030. So focusing on green steel, obviously development of green hydrogen. I'm pushing for the establishment of an industry transition fund, an agency, so that we can identify the opportunities and ensure we're putting in place the training and programs necessary to facilitate that. And that also overlaps with energy, because energy, obviously, we need to assist communities that have traditionally been reliant on fossil fuels. And the opportunities are there. Industry needs to look at that, and we've seen through COVID the benefits of getting back to domestic manufacturing and getting back to, I think, a bit more self-reliance in Australia. Then the final sector, the 5th step, is around agriculture and our land management. Agriculture is on the front line of global warming impacts and will pay a price. There will be a huge cost to agriculture. And so we need to better invest into sustainable farming practices and put in place a fund to assist our farming community to do that transition. But also we need to focus on carbon sequestration, and the easiest way to do that is to plant trees. So we need to stop deforestation. We still have record amounts of deforestation occurring. So I'm pushing for 8 mega hectares of native forest to be planted by 2030. So we need to focus on that and create incentives for landowners to have a percentage of their land reforested, essentially.
Rewilding.
We need to put value on that, and that's important. So the 5 steps are really simple. It doesn't have to be so hard, but you also do have to focus on creating, the roadmap of how we do it. In terms of, we are still spending in each budget about a proportion of 80-1 on fossil fuels compared to renewables. So the government, it's all spending.
That's crazy, isn't it? That's 80-1.
80-1 on spending. And every time in the last 3 years, I introduced amendments to try and limit public spending to endeavours that are consistent with a net zero future. So funds like the Northern Territory Infrastructure, the NAIF fund, or our foreign investment funds, to ensure that investment of public funds should only be done in a way consistent with a net zero future. Right? So this is not revolutionary. Both sides of politics are committed to net zero. So they should be able to vote for those amendments, but they don't. So time and time again, every MP that says they're committed to climate change and global warming, but every time there's an opportunity to prove your commitment with your vote, they fail.
Yeah.
They time and time again, they continue to vote for spending of public money on fossil fuels.
Yeah, and I think the NAIF, I'm not sure if it ended up happening, but wasn't $1 billion of the NAIF going to go to Adani at some point?
Yeah, it's all towards expanding fossil fuels and gas. The bulk of that fund has gone to the gas fracking of the Beetaloo Basin, right?
That
it's a
is just
methane
shocking.
bomb waiting to happen. So, and this is where, for me as an independent, I've been really focused on, let's pull back the curtain on Canberra and let people understand and know much more what is happening in Canberra. How does it work? Why are we not progressing these policy issues? So for everyone who cares about climate, wants us to prosper and be safe in the future, check out the 5 steps to net zero. It's a sensible plan, and it will get us to so many more opportunities.
Excellent. And they can check that out on your website.
On my website, zalisteggall.com.au. And if you want more information, particularly about the climate change bill, that's at climateactnow.com.au.
Okay.
But it's all the links are on my website.
Cool. Cool. So we've talked about climate and the electric vehicles, renewable energy in relation to climate change. I'd like to talk about EVs in relation to public health, which is something I'm really interested in as well. And basically at the moment, cities like Melbourne and Sydney, we have millions of petrol and diesel cars in our cities. They're basically farting out this toxic exhaust, which is full of diesel particulate and carbon monoxide, which is terrible for our health. And you and I and everyone that we care about is breathing this stuff in every day, and we've been breathing it in our whole lives. And something that blows my mind is that there's not a human on the planet who lives in a city who hasn't been breathing in this stuff their whole lives, right? But the opportunity is that once we get to 100% electrification of our transport, we're going to have pure clean air in our cities for the first time in like 100 years. So there's no one alive who's actually experienced that, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is where in COVID, what was really interesting was how much cleaner the air got because of the lessening of transport. All aviation came to a standstill. And so you just didn't have that pollution. And some of the images around the world of, Mount of Everest being clear and visible, and the lack of pollution in countries like India and China because of lockdowns was just amazing. And it was just that sign of what was possible, what we could be doing. But everyone talks about, obviously the particulate pollution from an air point of view, but it's also noise. Noise pollution is a big part of our lives. And EVs are so incredibly silent. And so especially in urban environments like Warringah, where we do have a high density of traffic, the improvement to our quality of life from the quietness that will come with electrification of transport, it really can't be overstated. Like, it really will be a fundamental difference.
Absolutely. And you probably notice this as much as I do, because like me, you're an EV owner, and when you're an EV owner, you start to notice it more. You start to notice exhaust more, you start to notice the sound more. And even like now, like I had breakfast today at outside a cafe, and huge diesel buses roaring past, and just think to yourself, wow, this could be so much better. This is going to be so much better when we fully electrify. Oh, look, getting rid of diesel buses will be huge. We just, I think the mandate on state governments to get rid of diesel buses is really, really important. We do need more public transport options, there's no doubt about it. I want to see more electric trams come into play as well, and just more public transport options. It's really important. But there's no point on ignoring, we are still we're familiar with the comforts of car ownership. I'm not a greenie to the state of you're going to have to give up your lifestyle and everyone's got to give up car ownership, but I do think we need to get more efficient. There is a huge amount of equity and wealth tied up in
in car ownership. And if you think about in our cities, Damon Gamo in his 2040 movie really explored that idea that we drive our cars to work, or people that drive their car to work, the car then sits there unused for 10 to 12 hours, so taking up some important real estate in our cities, in big car parks. It's such a wasted asset for all those hours. And so with vehicles like this, with the AI developing, what is fascinating to think of is where will transport of the future go? Will we have a much more mobile, hop-on, hop-off public transport system with smaller vehicles that are available for use? And we're already seeing that. Younger generations are just not as interested in car ownership. Many young people are not going for driver's licenses, so they are really already changing how they. Is this where we want to do our?
You can do another one, yeah, absolutely.
So it made me faintly sick earlier, but anyway, we'll do it anyway. We'll go again. There we go. And there we are, the speed limit. Yeah. So it's really interesting. Gen Z, what's the new Alpha? It really changing how we view asset ownership and especially car ownership.
Yeah, absolutely. It's super exciting. I obviously love talking about electric vehicles. You may have noticed.
That's fine.
Yeah, but there's so many other intersecting things that come with electric vehicles as well. And another one is this vehicle-to-grid technology, and this idea of this decentralized batteries, where a lot of people are probably familiar with a Tesla home wall battery, which is about 15 kilowatt hours. The battery in this car is actually 75 kilowatt hours, so it's 5 times the size. So then the question is why not use this as your home battery? And what's probably going to happen in future is that we're going to have a city like Sydney may have 1 million electric vehicle batteries plugged into households, all trading electricity autonomously with the grid. That's super exciting.
Yeah, I mean all the opportunities around microgrids are really exciting. But it's also better making use of community. So I recently launched in Brookvale in Warringah Solar Alliance, which is a combination between Zero Emission Sydney North and Clear Sky. I have to get all my facts right, I'll check that later. But around Solar Alliance is a project to electrify Brookvale, which is a more industrial centre for Warringah, and with the purpose of ultimately getting batteries in, and so having that kind of urban microgrid, which I think is just has great opportunity. And also, sometimes installing renewable can be there's a price point, tension. It's a long-term investment for a business, but so having opportunities to have community backing and buy-in to install renewables it will be, I think, a game changer for a lot of businesses. I think between EVs, plugging in, creating a grid, it's huge opportunities. A question I'm often asked about my 3 years in politics has been, is it what I thought it was going to be? And I would say it's met. The best and worst of my expectations have been met. So the best expectations of being able to genuinely help people in your community, make a difference, put forward sensible plans, that has been fantastic. And some of the people I've met, incredibly smart, future-focused people. But the downside has been my expectations in terms of accountability, transparency, corruption have actually all been there as well. So we desperately need a Federal Integrity Commission to bring back some accountability to how government spends public money. I've been shocked by the lack of fiscal discipline around many programs and how it works. Just billions of dollars thrown on projects that have no clear business case or clear future, sort of payback.
Yeah.
But then
No benefit to the public either.
no long-term benefit, just political benefit, like pork barrelling, which is corruption. But then programs that have huge long-term benefit to the community, there's this penny pinching attitude of we can't possibly give more than, a $2.50 increase for people that are out of work needing assistance in the transition. So I find there's a real discrepancy in what's happening. So we just don't have any fiscal discipline, and that needs to come back in. We have the Auditor General that does a huge amount of work and very important work, but it's also it only has the opportunity to review after money has been spent. So it's just it's not enough. We need a Federal Integrity Commission to raise the standards of government, of ministers, of decision making, and of members of Parliament to ensure that we are genuinely there for the public interest.
Yep. And Helen Haynes, has she been kind of leading on that as well?
So as independents, what we tend to do is we, are very aligned on questions of principle, but we all take on maybe different policy areas that are key areas of our constituents. So Helen ironically seconded the climate change bill when I presented it, and I seconded the Federal Integrity Commission legislation that she put forward, so that we're able to, diversify our resources. And she has absolutely been championing that Federal Integrity Commission, and I strongly support it, and we all continue to work very hard for it. Truth in political advertising. Now, when you talk about integrity, it's quite baffling that in politics in Australia, we have so little standards. I've introduced legislation to stop lies in political advertising.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because I've recently seen these brightly coloured billboards, a $30 million campaign from the government bragging about their climate policies and stating things like a 20% reduction in emissions since 2005, which the Australia Institute has done research on and found to be misleading, because they're based on avoided deforestation, not actual emissions cuts, but they're using these big bright billboards to brag about these really non-existent climate credentials.
Well, that's probably slightly different, but yes, I mean, that advertising is, I would say, the misuse of public funds for political party gain, right? That is the government trying to greenwash its credentials at the expense of the public. But stopping the lies in political advertising is actually especially around campaigns, the claims that get made that are completely devoid of a factual basis, whether it's tarnishing the credibility and reputation of your opponent, or in terms of your policy platform. Now, in business, right, in sale of goods or provision of services, we have laws that protect consumers from misleading and deceptive conduct. You can't lie about your product or service. But yet in politics, it's like there's just no legislation. So other than you can't misdirect a voter on how to vote, so putting an ABC instead of a 1, 2, 3, there are no laws. There's just nothing. So it's just devoid of regulation. And it's really dangerous, because what that means is our democracy is eroding. Trust in democracy, trust in government is eroding. I think key issues that are needed is we need to address corruption and integrity in the Australian Parliament. We're seeing year after year an erosion of trust in our government and in politics, and that's not good, because we need government to be truly representative of the concerns of the Australian people, and we need to make sure that those concerns are being addressed. What we're seeing is this the rise of pork barrelling to levels that we have never seen before, and people need to be offended by that. Pork barrelling is corruption. Spending of public money needs to be for overall public good. It needs to meet a certain need within a community, and not just a fabricated need to be able to generate support and votes.
Yeah, and did I see a couple of weeks ago that there's $16 billion worth of funds not yet, decisions not yet
So in
made.
the last budget and in the, in October with the budget update, Josh Frydenberg, confirmed there's $16 billion of decisions made but not yet announced.
Wow.
Now, yes, there's some element of decisions maybe that, full costings may not yet be available, but that's ridiculous. That's a massive amount of pork barrelling at a time where we are at record levels of debt, right? The Australian economy, we are approaching $1 trillion level of debt. Future generations are going to have to address that. There is a duty to make sure public spending is done in a fiscally responsible way. We cannot be wasting billions of dollars on pork barrelling.
And the pork barrelling thing, it's been normalised, hasn't it? And I know at the state level, Gladys Berejiklian made some comments last year, which she basically said it's normal.
Yeah, it was very disappointing to hear those comments. It sounded just a little bit like sort of giving up on questions of principle. And I think it's maybe symptomatic of the bigger malaise that there is within the party machine and the Liberal Party around normalising pork barrelling, that they've come to view the public purse as something to be used for that party gain. And they I think I get the impression they think that because they may not personally profit, that is not corruption, but it is corruption. If you're spending public money for anything other than public good, it is corruption with an alternate process. So for me, I really want to see more scrutiny and more accountability on government decision making. Too many decisions in the last 3 years have been done under ministerial discretion, away from proper departmental recommendations. So I think there should be a cap on within spending or programs that you can't have more than something like 20% of a program up for ministerial discretion. That if there are recommendations and there is a process and there is a tender process and there are clear guidelines on a program or a grants process, then you should not be able to override the guidelines with ministerial discretion. At the end of the day, for me, what I think is really important in democracy is for communities to have a choice, right? There's nothing worse than having a compulsory voting system, turning up at the ballot box and not finding anyone on that ballot paper that is taking a stance and that you feel will represent you truly. So the most important thing is to have choice on the ballot paper. And I think that is what the independent candidates that are running in many different seats are doing for their communities. They're giving them a community-backed choice.
One of the other things that I've really noticed over the last 6 months at least is that, climate change is now a really key issue leading up to this election, especially after the Glasgow climate talks, etc. And what we've started to see is a lot of the inner city Liberal members who are trying to put out messaging that they're really pro-climate. But in actual fact, when you look at their voting record, they're voting the same way as people like Barnaby Joyce.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think whilst, they're very nice people, they are incredibly ineffective. I think they are wolves in sheep's clothing because they are duping their communities into thinking that they are electing representatives that will act on global warming, on emissions reduction. But when push comes to shove and it's time to vote, they invariably always vote with the party. They vote for funding fossil fuels. I think it's really important for people to realise that they're incredibly ineffective. And the one way you can look at it is look at what have they achieved, right? We still have in 2022, despite bushfires, floods, droughts, numerous IPCC reports, our official target for 2030 under Scott Morrison is still the target set by Tony Abbott in 2015.
This is Tony climate change is crap, Abbott.
Tony climate change is crap. Our official targets are still 26 to 28% emission reduction by 2030. Now, all these moderates will talk a big game around, but our ambition is 35% emission by 2030. But this is not locked in. This is when we went to COP26 last year, the government refused to formally change its climate emission target. Our formal commitment is still 26 to 28% by 2030, which Tony Abbott set in 2015. I mean, think about how much has happened since 2015 that should really just blow that target out of the water. And so for all those MPs, they are just so incredibly ineffective, and they talk about the importance of having a seat at the table and being in government, and what can an independent do if you're not in a party. It has been proven and shown they are incredibly ineffective inside the party room because they simply are not willing to take a stand. So it's all talk, no action, and that's why communities are looking for alternatives. They've really left this vacuum, this space in these electorates for independents to step into. Absolutely. Look, I think they are nearly the most dangerous politicians because, look, if you vote for Matt Canavan or Barnaby Joyce, you know what you're going to get, right? You know you're getting a climate denier. You know you're not going to get someone who's going to act on emissions reduction. But if you start voting for these moderates who make all these promises about, yes, I'm concerned about global warming, and yes, we need to reduce emissions and net zero and all these things, but then they get to Parliament and they do nothing. They do nothing about it. And it's not just on climate. They've done nothing on the Uluru Statement and Indigenous recognition. They have done nothing on the Federal Integrity Commission. It's all talk, no action. So communities can see through that and are looking for alternatives.
And I'll just mention as well that I have extended the invitation for a drive to Dave Sharma and to Trent Zimmerman and others. So Dave and Trent, if you're watching, I'd love to take you for a drive if you can, and talk about some of these things. But yeah, I mean, it's also the same with Katie Allen down in Melbourne, who also her messaging. I've seen videos of Katie Allen standing next to Angus Taylor saying that she's passionate about action on climate. Well, where's the proof? Her voting record is exactly the same as Barnaby Joyce.
But also, I had numerous discussions with many of members of the coalition who claim to be focused on global warming. And I can assure you in 2019, 2020, that they still gave me the BS line of, but Australia is only 1.3% of global emissions. What could we really do?
So tired, that line.
It's just so, it's just boring. And so there is no real motivation. There's no real commitment to it. The only person I've seen to really show conviction in this current Parliament has been Bridget Archer, the member for Bass, where she has taken a stance on Federal Integrity Commission. She has abstained from votes that were contrary to her integrity and her moral compass. She has been a member of the Environment and Energy Committee that did the review. She did take a stance on climate. She strongly feels I would like to see her cross the floor on climate, but she's very much the only MP I've seen to really stand up for her beliefs, and I think that has put her in better stead. Her community knows she will fight for them.
Let's talk about that for a sec, because she showed a lot of courage to do that within her political landscape. That would have been an incredibly tough thing to do, I guess, but she's now going to have a bit of a different legacy to someone like Dave Sharma, or, you know, their legacy is at stake here. If they fail to act, their children and their grandchildren are going to look back and say, well, what, you know, you were in Parliament in 10, 20 years' time. What's their legacy going to be like, you know, when we're really starting to see a lot of these natural disasters that we're seeing now? What's their legacy going to be like?
Well, I think, look, the key figure that you look at with that is someone like Matthias Cormann, right, who was a major player in rubbishing strong emissions reduction policies for all his time in the Senate, and now, you know, is obviously changed his tune. I do get frustrated by that, by members of Parliament who, when they're in, are so focused on their own survival that they don't take a stance, but then all of a sudden discover a conscience once they're out. You know, it's when you're in that you've got the capacity to make a difference.
Yeah.
You need to make that difference while you're there. So yes, look, I don't think. I often wonder what do members of government, ministers and backbenchers think their legacy of their time is. Do they think it's just on the local level with the community, or what do they feel their ultimate long-term impact on legislation and the course of Australia is? And yeah, I mean, it is sometimes incredibly stunning and baffling, the lack of political courage.
Yeah. Here we are.
But here we are. But anyway, people have had enough, and I think, you know, I really, really hope 2019 is a Kodak moment for Australian politics. We need to move on from the old style way of doing politics, and let's move on to the more dynamic and more representative
Totally. And
way of doing it.
I'll finish with one thing that I've been thinking about lately, is that the result of the Australian federal election, which will be within the next 3 months, will affect how much carbon dioxide is in the Earth's atmosphere in 10 or 20 years' time. Absolutely. Right? That's pretty big. That's a big deal.
But yeah, look, we can't afford another 3 years of waiting. Like, we're 2022, to have any hope of significant emissions reduction by 2030, we need to have the right kind of policy levers in place.
Yeah, and the things that we do now as Australians in the next 3 months will determine the result of that election. So it's quite an incredible moment in time that we're all living in here. We have the possibility. We have the opportunity here to really change the course that the entire world is on, even by a small amount. But that opportunity is there. So we have to recognise that we live in a truly historical moment right now, I think.
Yeah, look, I think, you know, a lot of people get quite paralysed by anxiety or by a sense of helplessness, that these problems are too big for them individually to tackle. And I'm not for 1 minute supporting the idea that, you know, you put the responsibility back on consumers and individuals. These are institutional questions.
Yep.
These are, you know, responsibilities of government and the big corporates. But I also want people to know that they absolutely have power. They have the ability to make a difference. You know, if I could say as a final point would be, if you are concerned about global warming and climate change, you have your 3 most effective tools. Number 1 is your vote. How you vote determines climate policy, and so make sure you vote 1 for climate. Number 2 is where your money is. So look to your bank, to your superannuation, because if we continue to fund fossil fuels, we will not be able to transition away. So we need to look at your money. Money has power, and so you make your money work for you and your concerns. And number 3, take what steps you can. It's not about being judgmental, about being an environmental warrior and perfect. No one is perfect, but it is about make those decisions and make informed choices where you can. So if it's time to change your car, transition to an EV.
Yep.
if you're not yet in a position to change vehicle, consider offsetting your vehicle. It's only a few $100s a year that you can offset with Green Fleet. Look at your options around, make sure you get renewable energy, 100% renewable energy in your home. If you can't yet afford to have solar panels, you can ensure that your supplier is 100% renewable energy. And look at moving away from any use of gas, right? Gas is really bad. It has a huge impact on global warming.
Yep.
And so just looking at all those three, and whenever you're consuming, think about, do I want it or do I need it?
Yeah.
And so really prioritizing that can make a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Just want to say thanks very much for coming for a drive today, Zali.
Pleasure.
I've really enjoyed the conversation. I think that Australia has an incredible opportunity at the moment to not only change politics, but to also grab this incredible opportunity to move to clean technology and really develop a much better Australia over the next 10, 20 years. And I also want to wish you all the best for your campaign.
Thank you.